A small cloth bag clutched tightly in her grip, a prescription folded carefully inside. She expected nothing more than the routine exchange. Hand over the slip, wait for the pills, pay the bill, and return home. Simple, ordinary, life-saving. But today, the pharmacist didn't even glance at the paper. His smirk was sharp, cutting deeper than the words themselves. Why waste money? At your age, what's the point? For a moment, she thought she had misheard him. Perhaps her ears, dulled by time, had tricked her. But no, the words hung in the air like poison, each syllable slicing at her pride. People behind her in line shifted uncomfortably, avoiding her gaze, pretending not to hear. Her heart thudded against her chest. She wasn't just angry, she was humiliated. This was more than medicine. It was her independence, her proof that she mattered. And now this man, this stranger in a white coat, was telling her she didn't deserve it, that she didn't need it, that she didn't matter. She forced her lips to move, her voice trembling. But the doctor said, he cut her off with a wave of his hand. Doctors say a lot of things. You old people cling to pills like crutches. Truth is, you'd be better off without them. Nature will take its course. The sentence felt like a death sentence. Something hot surged in her chest. Not fear this time, but fury. How dare he decide her worth? How dare he reduce a lifetime of struggle, sacrifice, and survival to a shrug and a sneer? She staggered back a step, her knuckles white against the folded prescription. Behind her, someone cleared their throat impatiently, eager to move forward, eager to erase the uncomfortable scene, but she couldn't move, not yet. Her mind spun with memories. The long nights she'd stayed awake by her husband's hospital bed, whispering prayers between each beep of the monitor. The mornings she dragged herself out of bed despite aching joints because her children needed her. The decades she spent believing that medicine, those small bitter pills, were not just drugs but hope in a bottle. And now this man was telling her hope was useless. Her throat tightened. She wanted to scream, to throw the words. First time she heard those words, old people don't need medicine. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. She had come to the pharmacy with her usual quiet dignity, the same way she had for years, back at him to demand respect. But all she managed was silence, a silence so sharp it hurt more than any insult. The pharmacist leaned closer, lowering his voice as if sharing a cruel joke. Save your money. At your age, you're just waiting. That word cut deeper than the rest. Waiting for what? For death, for the world to forget she existed. Her bag slipped from her hand and hit the tiled floor with a dull thud. The sound startled her, but no one moved to help. Not one person bent down to pick it up. Not one pair of eyes met hers. For the first time in her life, she felt invisible. But invisibility had a strange way of awakening something inside her, beneath the shame, beneath the anger, beneath the tears that threatened to spill. A new feeling began to rise, something she hadn't felt in years. Resolve. She bent slowly, deliberately, and picked up her bag. Her fingers trembled, but her spine straightened. She looked at the pharmacist, her eyes glinting with a fire he hadn't expected. For a brief second he faltered, shifting uncomfortably under her gaze. She didn't say another word, not here, not now. But in her mind, a promise had already been made. This wasn't the end. This insult, this humiliation, this cruel dismissal of her worth, it would not go unanswered. As she walked out of the pharmacy, each step echoed louder than the last. The sliding glass doors opened and closed behind her, but in her chest something else opened too, a door she thought had long been sealed shut, the past, because buried in her past, hidden in dust and shut. A douse was something she had ignored for too long, something her husband had left behind, something she wasn't ready to face until now. This wasn't the end, this insult, this humiliation, this cruel dismissal of her worth. It would not go unanswered. As she walked out of the pharmacy, each step echoed louder than the last. The sliding glass doors opened and closed behind her, but in her chest, something else opened too, a door she thought had long been sealed shut. The past. because buried in her past, hidden in dust and shadows, was something she had ignored for too long, something her husband had left behind, something she wasn't ready to face until now. She clutched her bag tighter and whispered to herself, "If they think old people don't matter, they're about to learn just how wrong they are." And with that vow, her payback began. It wasn't always like this. There was a time when she walked into that same pharmacy and was greeted with smiles instead of smirks. A time when her hair wasn't streaked with silver, when her back wasn't bent, and when her name carried weight. She had once been known in the neighborhood as a woman of strength, a mother who raised her children through hardship, and a wife who stood beside her husband no matter the storm. Years ago, life felt simpler. She remembered mornings in the small house she shared with her husband, the warm smell of tea leaves boiling, the sound of sparrows on the window, and the low hum of his voice reading the newspaper aloud. He was a quiet man, but his presence filled every corner of their world. His hands, calloused from years of labor, had always been steady when hers trembled. And yet, even in that time of calm, small cracks had already begun to show. The first crack was financial. Her husband worked at the very same pharmacy that now dismissed her. Back then, it wasn't just a business, it was a community pillar. People trusted the pharmacist's smile, the neat rows of medicine bottles, the promise that healing could be found behind those counters. But he had come home late some nights, his brow furrowed, his silence heavy. When she pressed him, he would the bedside table like soldiers ready for a battle already lost. He grew weaker by the day, yet even in his frailty, he tried to comfort her. One night when the machines beeped steadily beside him, he whispered, "Promise me something. If one day you find out the truth, don't stay silent." She had no idea what he meant, but the weight of his words clung to her long after his final breath. After his passing, she was left with more than grief. She was left with bills, with loneliness, with children who had grown distant, each wrapped in their own lives. The house felt too quiet, the bed too cold. She poured her days into small routines, sweeping the courtyard, making tea, counting her medicine bottles. The pharmacy became her lifeline, not just for pills, but for the sense of continuity. Each visit reminded her of her husband, of the battles they had fought together. She trusted the men behind the counter because he once stood there. She believed their words, their prescriptions, their prices, because to doubt them was to doubt the memory of her husband's work. But over the years, she noticed things shifting. The smiles grew thinner, the bills thicker, the medicine bottles changed names, their labels more confusing, their prices higher. Some neighbors whispered of being overcharged of pills that didn't work the way they used to. Others said the pharmacy cared less about healing and more about profit. Still, she chose silence out of loyalty, out of habit, out of fear. Until that morning when the pharmacist's words sliced through her like knives, "Old people don't need medicine." She walked home slowly, her legs heavy, but her mind racing. She sat on the edge of her bed and let the memories flutter, the cracks, the warnings, her husband's final words. She could no longer ignore the truth, pressing at the edges of her heart. Something was wrong. Something had always been wrong. And perhaps, just perhaps, her husband had tried to tell her. Her gaze shifted toward the garage, the one room in the house she had avoided since his death. Its door was always locked, its windows always shut, its silence always too heavy. She had told herself it was grief that kept her away, but now a new thought gripped her. What if the answers lay inside? Her hands trembled as she reached for the old ring of keys. For the first time in years, she walked toward the garage. Each step felt like a step into the past, toward secrets buried in dust and shadows. And though fear clawed at her chest, one thing was clear: her husband's secrets were no longer safe in the dark. Her fingers fumbled with the keys. The metal jingled like tiny bells, but there was nothing musical in the sound. It was sharp, urgent, almost accusing. She hadn't touched this key ring in years. Dust clung to the grooves, as if even the metal itself had forgotten its purpose. The garage door loomed before her, its paint flaking, its hinges rusted. For years she had passed it without thought, telling herself there was no reason to go inside. But now, standing there with her heart hammering in her chest, she knew this door was more than just wood and iron. It was a barrier between the life she thought she knew and the truths her husband had taken to the grave. Her hand shook as she slid the key into the lock. For a moment she almost turned back. Maybe it's nothing, she whispered to herself. Maybe I'm chasing shadows. But the memory of the pharmacist's smirk burned fresh in her mind, fueling her resolve. She twisted the key. The lock gave a stubborn click, followed by the groan of metal surrendering after years of silence. The door creaked open, releasing a breath of stale air. It smelled of dust oil and something older, something like secrets. She hesitated on the threshold, clutching her shawl tightly around her shoulders. Then, with a deep breath, she stepped inside. Her flashlight beam swept across the room. Metal shelves, stacks of forgotten boxes, jars filled with screws and nails, a bicycle with its tires. Long deflated. It was exactly what one would expect in an old garage. But then her light landed on something that made her breath hitch. Boxes. Not ordinary storage boxes, but neat cartons lined against the back wall, sealed with brittle tape, each marked with faded black ink. She squinted, leaning closer. The handwriting was familiar. Her husband's. Her knees felt weak as she crouched and brushed the dust from the nearest box. The label read Inventory, 1998. She frowned. Inventory. He had never kept anything like this at home. She tore the tape and opened the box. Inside, carefully arranged, were rows of medicine bottles. Their labels were yellowed with age, but the names were unmistakable. Blood pressure tablets, pain relievers, antibiotics. Her pulse quickened. Why had he brought these home? She set the box aside and opened another. More medicine and another stacks of ledgers thick with handwritten notes. Receipts clipped together in bundles, price lists. Her husband's meticulous handwriting filled every margin, every line. She picked up one of the ledgers and flipped through the pages. At first it looked like routine bookkeeping, but then she noticed something odd. 2 sets of numbers, one column marked actual cost, another marked charged, and the difference between the two was staggering. Her hands shook as realization crept over her. They hadn't just been selling medicine, they had been overcharging, exploiting. The numbers painted a picture of greed, one transaction at a time. Her flashlight slipped slightly, casting long shadows across the room. She felt her breath shorten, panic creeping in. This wasn't just about high prices, this was deception, carefully hidden. She set the ledger down and opened a smaller box at the corner of the shelf. Inside was a bundle of envelopes bound with string. Her fingers trembled as she untied the knot and pulled one free. Inside were letters, complaints from patients, old neighbors, early men and women who had written about their struggles to afford their medicine, pleas for help. Descriptions of how their health had worsened because they couldn't keep up with the costs. Tears stung her eyes as she read. Each letter was like a cry from the past, voices of people she had once known. Some of the names were familiar friends who had passed away years ago, neighbors who had slipped quietly into the grave. And here in these forgotten letters was the reason why her husband had kept them. He hadn't thrown them away. He had saved every word, every voice, as though he wanted someone someday to read them. Her chest tightened. For years she had thought his silence was apathy, but maybe it was guilt. Maybe he had carried the weight of these secrets until it crushed him. The flashlight flickered. She adjusted it quickly, her palms damp with sweat. Something at the far end of the garage caught her eye. A wooden chest tucked beneath a heavy tarp. Unlike the cardboard boxes, this chest looked deliberate, placed hidden. Her steps were unsteady as she crossed the room. She tugged at the tarp, sending a cloud of dust into the air. The chest was locked, but the lock was old. She jammed another key into it, praying it would fit. After a tense moment, the lock snapped open. Inside lay folders, dozens of them, each labeled with dates. She pulled one out, opened it, and gasped. Photocopies of prescriptions, stacks upon stacks of them, all written by local doctors. But many of them had something strange in common, the same set of medicines repeated again and again, no matter the illness. Her stomach turned. It was a scheme. Doctors prescribing unnecessary pills, the pharmacies selling them at inflated prices, and the elderly, trusting, desperate, loyal, paying the price with their savings, their health, their lives. Her hands flew to her mouth as a sob escaped. She had lived her whole life believing medicine was hope. But here in the dim light of her husband's garage, she saw the truth. Medicine had been turned into a weapon, not to heal, but to profit. Her husband had known. He had tried to record it, maybe even expose it, but he never found the courage, and now the burden had fallen on her. She collapsed onto a nearby stool, the weight of the discovery pressing down on her chest. The pharmacist's words echoed again. Old people don't need medicine. Now she understood. It wasn't ignorance. It wasn't just cruelty. It was strategy. The fewer pills the elderly received, the more profit the pharmacy made from others who would pay anything to survive. Her tears blurred the pages of the ledger she still held. But beneath the grief, beneath the horror, something else ignited inside her, a fire. She closed the ledger, her jaw tightening. Her husband had carried this secret alone, but she would not. No. This time the truth would not stay buried in the dark. The ledger still lay heavy in her lap, but her eyes kept drifting back to the wooden chest. Something told her she hadn't reached the end, not yet. She brushed aside another layer of dust and dug deeper. Beneath the folders of prescriptions, her hand touched something different. An envelope. It was yellowed with age, its paper brittle. The corners curled across the front in handwriting she recognized instantly was her name. Her heart lurched. For a moment she froze. She had seen his handwriting countless times on grocery lists, quick notes left on the dining table, his signature scrawled across bills. But this was different. His letters were shaky, uneven, as if each stroke had cost him strength. Her breath caught. This was written near the end. With trembling fingers she broke the seal. The paper crackled softly as she unfolded it. The words blurred at first, her tears threatening to spill, but she blinked hard and forced herself to read. My dearest, if you are reading this, then I am gone. I did not have the courage to tell you these things while I lived. I wanted to protect you, but perhaps in my silence I only left you burdened with questions, her Cyan blurred again, but she pressed on. I worked at that pharmacy for decades. At first I believed in it. I believed we were helping people, easing their pain. But slowly I began to see what was truly happening. The medicines were priced far higher than they should be. Doctors were writing prescriptions for pills people didn't even need, and the ones who suffered the most were the elderly, the ones who trusted us the most. Her chest tightened. I tried to speak once. They silenced me. I tried again. They threatened me. They told me I would lose my job, and worse, that they would make sure our family suffered. So I stayed quiet. I told myself I was protecting you, protecting the children. But every day, the weight grew heavier. Her hands trembled as she held the paper closer. Desperate for every word, I began keeping records, ledgers, receipts, letters. I don't know if I hoped one day I would find the courage to expose them, or if I prayed someone else would. Maybe that someone is you. Maybe it's too much to ask, but if you ever find this, know that the truth matters. Even if it costs something, even if it hurts, the truth matters. Her tears finally spilled, falling onto the page. The ink smudged slightly, but his words remained. Forgive me for my silence. Forgive me for leaving this burden in your hands, but I believe you are stronger than you know. You always were. If the day comes when you decide to act, remember, you are not alone. You carry the voices of every person they cheated, every life they endangered. You carry mine. The letter ended there, no signature, just a blank space where his name should have been. She pressed the page to her chest, her sobs quiet but relentless. For years she had thought his silence was weakness. Now she saw it for what it was. Fear, yes, but also love. He had carried this secret not because he didn't care, but because he cared too much. He wanted to shield her. He wanted to shield their children. But in doing so, he had condemned himself to die with the truth unspoken. She wiped her tears, her hands still clutching the fragile paper. Something shifted. Inside her, this wasn't just his confession, it was his plea, his final gift. She looked around the garage, the boxes, the ledgers, the letters, the prescriptions. This was more than clutter. This was evidence, proof of years of exploitation, proof of lives lost, proof of crimes buried under profit and greed. Her grief turned into resolve. The pharmacist's cruel words echoed in her mind again. Old people don't need medicine, but she knew now. They didn't say that because they believed it. They said it because it was convenient, because silencing the elderly meant silencing the truth. She folded the letter carefully and tucked it into her shawl close to her heart. It no longer felt like just paper. It felt like a torch passed into her hands, burning with purpose. For the first time since his death, she didn't feel alone. He was with her. His voice, his strength, his plea, all of it pulsed inside her veins, and she knew what she had to do. The past could no longer stay hidden. The truth could no longer stay buried. Her husband had left her the map. Now it was her turn to follow it. The letter still burned against her chest as she stepped out of the garage. Her shawl was coated with dust, her hands smudged with ink and dirt, but she didn't notice. Her mind was racing, her heart pounding. For the first time since that humiliating morning in the pharmacy, she felt clarity. The truth was in her hands. But the moment she pushed open the kitchen door, another storm awaited her. Her son sat at the table scrolling through his phone, the glow of the screen casting shadows across his face. He barely looked up when she entered. "You're covered in dirt," he muttered, his tone sharp, as though she had interrupted his peace rather than returned from unraveling decades of secrets. She set the shawl carefully on the chair, her fingers brushing against the letter hidden inside. In the garage that caught his attention, his head snapped up, eyes narrow. "Rowing the garage. That's locked. Not anymore." Her voice was calm, steady, but inside she braced herself. He pushed his chair back and stood looming over her. "Why were you in there?" "That garage doesn't belong to you." The words cut deeper than she expected. That garage filled with her husband's handwriting, his memories, his confessions, not hers. "It was your father's," she said firmly, "and now it's mine." His laugh was short, bitter. "No, it isn't. Everything here, this house, the garage, even those dusty boxes, it all belongs to me now. You're just keeping it warm." Her breath caught. She had known her son had grown distant over the years, caught up in his work, his greed for a better life. But hearing it said aloud so coldly pierced her deeper than she was ready for. She steadied herself. "Your father left something important behind, things you need to see. Proof of what was happening in that pharmacy. He was trying to protect us, protect everyone," but her son wasn't listening. His eyes gleamed, not with curiosity or concern, but with hunger. "Proof." "What kind of proof?" She hesitated. In that hesitation, he pounced. He brushed past her, storming toward the garage, throwing the door wide before she could stop him. His footsteps echoed inside as he tore into the boxes, ripping lids open, flipping through ledgers without care. "These are worth something," he said, his voice sharp with excitement. "Do you have any idea what people would pay for this? To silence it, to bury it?" Her heart sank. "That's not what this is for. This isn't money, it's truth, it's justice. Your father wanted this to come out. He wanted the world to know what they did." He turned ledger in hand, eyes blazing. And you believe him. You believe these scribbles over common sense. Don't you see, Mother? This isn't about justice. It's leverage. With this, we could name our price. We could finally have the life we deserve. Her tears burned hot against her cheeks. The life we deserve. At what cost? At the cost of every old man and woman who died without medicine. At the cost of your father's silence, eating him alive. But he wasn't moved. His arrogance only grew. Dawn. Lecture me about costs. You've spent your whole life scraping by, clinging to your morals, and what did it get you? Nothing. Look at you shaking, begging for pills from people who don't care if you live or die. He waved the ledger. This is power, and I'm not going to waste it like he did. Her breath came in ragged gasps. This wasn't the boy she had raised. This wasn't the child she had held through fevers, the teenager she had defended against neighbors' gossip. This was a man blinded by greed, deaf to the voices of the past. Her voice trembled, but her words were steady. That garage doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the truth, and I will not let you sell it. He smirked, stepping closer, lowering his voice as though savoring each word. You don't have a choice. For a long moment, silence hung heavy between them. The only sound was the rustle of paper in his hands, the echo of their breathing. She searched his face for a trace of the boy she once knew, the son who used to sit by his father's side and listen to his stories. But all she saw was a stranger. Her resolve hardened. If you turn your back on this, she said softly, you are turning your back on your father, on me, on everyone who trusted us. For the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed his eyes, but it was gone in an instant, replaced by the same cold arrogance. He shoved the ledger back into the box and crossed his arms. Do what you want. But if you think I'm going to let you ruin everything for some moral crusade, you're wrong. That garage is mine, and so are the secrets inside it. She felt the letter press against her chest like a heartbeat. Her husband's words echoed in her mind. If one day you find the truth, don't stay silent. She met her son's gaze, her voice barely above a whisper, but carrying the weight of steel. Then we are no longer on the same side. His jaw tightened. For a moment she thought he would argue again, lash out, try to tear the evidence from her hands. But instead he turned sharply, storming out of the house, slamming the door behind him. The silence that followed was deafening. She sank into a chair, her body trembling, her heart aching. The boy she had raised was gone, consumed by the same greed that had poisoned the pharmacy. But even through her grief, one truth remained. She could not stop now. If her own son stood against her, then so be it. She would face him. She would face the pharmacist. She would face anyone who tried to bury the truth. Because for the first time in her life, she wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for every forgotten voice, every life lost in silence, every plea hidden in dusty envelopes. Her son could chase profit. She would chase justice, and their paths were destined to collide. The next morning dawned heavy, the air thick with a kind of silence that didn't belong. She had barely slept, her mind trapped between her son's bitter words and the weight of the letter pressed beneath her pillow. Every creak of the house reminded her of what she had lost, her husband's steady presence, her son's loyalty, her own sense of safety. But one thing remained, resolve. She tied her shawl firmly around her shoulders, slipped the letter and ledger into her worn handbag, and walked out the door. Her hands trembled not from weakness but from determination. She wasn't just going to whisper the truth anymore. She was going to speak it. The pharmacy loomed in front of her, deceptively clean and modern with its glass doors reflecting the morning sun. Behind its sterile counters and smiling staff was the rot her husband had uncovered. The building itself seemed to mock her with its false brightness. She pushed the door open. The chime above rang, and all heads turned. The young pharmacist, the same man who had humiliated her days before, froze. His smile faltered, replaced by irritation. "Well," he drawled, adjusting his pristine white coat, "look who decided to return. Out of pills again, old woman." Her lips tightened. For once, she didn't flinch. She placed her bag on the count. Her voice steady. "I didn't come for pills," he chuckled, glancing at the waiting customers as though inviting them to share the joke. "Then why are you here? To waste more of my time." She opened the bag slowly, deliberately, and pulled out the ledger. Its worn cover caught the light. Gasps rippled through the room as she laid it flat on the counter. "I came," she said, "for the truth." The pharmacist's smile collapsed. He leaned forward, his voice low, sharp. "Where did you get that?" Her gaze met his without wavering. "From my husband before he died. He left it for me because he knew what you were doing." Whispers broke out among the customers. The pharmacist straightened, forcing a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. "This is nonsense, an old woman's fantasy." She opened the ledger, flipping to a page her husband had marked with shaking hands. "These aren't fantasies, these are records. Proof that you've been withholding medicines, stockpiling them, selling them off while people like me, like him." Her voice cracked but quickly regained its edge. "While we suffered." His jaw tightened. He reached across the counter, trying to snatch the ledger, but she pulled it back. "Don't you dare." She snapped, her voice trembling with fury. "You don't understand what he left behind, and I won't let you destroy it." For the first time, his mask slipped. Rage flashed across his face. "Do you know what you're playing with, old woman? Do you know how much trouble this could bring you? People don't survive when they dig into things that don't concern them." The words were meant to intimidate. Years ago, they might have worked, but not today. She lifted her chin. "It does concern me. It concerns every family who buried their loved ones because you decided profits were worth more than people. It concerns every mother who couldn't afford the pills she needed. It concerns every old man who died gasping for breath. And it concerns me because I watched my husband break under the weight of your lies." The room fell silent. The customers weren't laughing now. They were listening. A woman in the back whispered, "My father died waiting for his heart medicine." Another man clenched his fist, nodding slowly. The pharmacist saw the tide turning. Desperation crept into his voice. "They'll believe me over you. I have the licenses, the reputation, the power. You're just a frail widow, clinging to ghosts." Her hand went to the letter in her bag. She pulled it out, unfolding the fragile paper, her husband's handwriting trembling across the page. "Then let them hear his voice," she said, and she began to read. The letter wasn't eloquent, but it was raw. Her husband's words spilled into the room, filled with guilt, with regret, with truth, how he had discovered the stockpiling, how he had begged the pharmacist to stop, how he had been threatened into silence, how the silence had eaten him alive until he couldn't bear it anymore. Tears blurred her eyes as she finished, but her voice never broke. She folded the letter carefully, like it was sacred, and looked at the man across the counter. "This is bigger than you, bigger than me. This is about justice." For the first time, the pharmacist faltered. His lips parted, but no words came out. His eyes darted to the customers, whose faces had hardened from curiosity into outrage. A man stepped forward. "She's telling the truth. I've seen shortages for months, and every time the prices go up." Another voice. "My mother died because the pills she needed never arrived." The crowd pressed closer, murmurs swelling into anger. The pharmacist backed away, his arrogance crumbling under the weight of their stares. She stood taller, though her body trembled. She wasn't just a widow anymore. She wasn't just a victim. She was a voice. Her husband's voice, her community's voice, her son's words echoed in her mind. "This is power, and I'm not going to waste it. He was wrong. This wasn't power. This was truth, and truth couldn't be sold." The pharmacist slammed his hand on the counter, trying to reclaim control. "You think you can destroy me with some old scribbles and a dead man?" Guilt. "You're a fool. You'll regret this." She met his fury with steel. "No, the only fool here is the man who thought secrets could stay buried forever." For a long, charged moment, their eyes locked. Hers filled with pain, but unbreakable resolve. His burning with fear, disguised as rage. And then the crowd surged forward. Voices demanded answers. Someone pulled out a phone recording everything. The pharmacist's empire of silence was cracking. She clutched the ledger to her chest, her husband's letter still in her hand, and whispered under her breath, "I did it, my love. I didn't stay silent." The pharmacy was chaos. Customers shouted, phones recorded, and whispers became accusations. The pharmacist's face was pale, his confidence shattered. He tried to shout over the noise, but the voices drowned him out, a wave he could no longer control. And in the middle of it all, she stood firm, the widow who had come for pills, but left with truth, the ledger clutched to her chest, her husband's letter trembling in her hands, her eyes blazing with a fire no one could deny. But then, through the commotion, another voice cut through the air. Enough. Her heart dropped. She turned, and there he was, her son. He shoved through the crowd, his suit sharp, his expression thunderous. All eyes shifted to him, sensing another storm about to break. He strode to her side, but instead of standing with her, he ripped the ledger from her hands. "This doesn't belong to her," he shouted, raising the book high. "It belongs to me." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The pharmacist's eyes lit up with sudden hope. Here was an ally, someone young, commanding someone who might help bury the fire before it spread. Her heart cracked. "Son," she whispered, her voice breaking. But he ignored her, turning to the pharmacist. "We can fix this. Pay me what this is worth, and I'll make sure it disappears." The crowd erupted. Shouts of disgust and betrayal filled the room. Someone spat on the floor. Or another cried, "You're no better than him." The widow staggered back as though the floor itself had given way beneath her. The boy she had raised, the man she had hoped would carry his father's integrity, was bargaining with death, with greed, with ghosts. Her lips trembled. "How could you? This is your father's blood on these pages, his last words, and you would sell them." Her son's face was stone. "I would survive, something you never learned to do." The pharmacist smirked, already pulling out his phone. "Finally, someone with sense. Let's talk numbers." The widow's hand shook, but not with fear, with fury. She reached into her bag and pulled out the letter again. Her husband's voice filled her mind, steadying her. "If one day you find the truth, don't stay silent, not even against those you love." Her eyes burned with tears, but her voice was steel. "No!" She stepped forward, her frail frame trembling, but her spirit unshaken. She turned not to the pharmacist, not to her son, but to the crowd. "Listen to me. My husband didn't die for this to be sold. He didn't suffer so that his own blood could profit. He left this for you, for all of us, so no one else would die in silence." The crowd hushed. Phones lifted higher, every ear bent toward her. Her son's face flushed red. "Stop it. You're making a fool of yourself." She turned to him, her gaze soft but piercing. "No, my son, I'm making a choice. A choice your father wanted us to make, to stand even when it costs everything." For the first time, his voice faltered. "Mother," the pharmacist, desperate, slammed his hand on the counter. "This is madness. She's an old woman raving about scribbles. None of this will hold in court." But even as he spoke, a uniformed officer stepped through the crowd. Someone had called the authorities. The officer took the ledger from her son's limp hands, flipping through the pages with a trained eye. "This," he said firmly, "is evidence." The room erupted again, but this time with vindication. Customers cheered, others wept. The pharmacist stammered, but the officer's grip was iron. "Sir, you're under arrest for fraud, withholding essential medication, and criminal negligence." The pharmacist's face collapsed. He shouted protest, but the cuffs clicked shut, and the cheers drowned his voice. The widow closed her eyes, her body trembling with release. It was over. But then her son, he stood frozen, the color drained from his face. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and for the first time the arrogance slipped. "Mother," his voice cracked raw, stripped of power, I thought." She turned her head, her heart aching. This was the boy she had raised, the boy who had lost his way. She wanted to hold him, to forgive him, but the wound was too fresh. Her voice was gentle but unyielding. You chose ruin when you could have chosen redemption. I cannot walk that path for you. His eyes filled with tears. He lowered his head, whispering words she never thought she'd hear. I'm sorry. It wasn't enough to undo the hurt, but it was something. A spark, small and trembling, but real. The officer closed the ledger, nodding respectfully at her. Ma'am, you've done something extraordinary today. You've given us what we need to stop this. She nodded, clutching the letter close. No, my husband did. I only carried his voice. The crowd parted as the officers led the pharmacist away. People reached out to touch her hand, to thank her, to bless her. She accepted each word humbly, tears streaming down her cheeks. For the first time in years, she didn't feel invisible. She didn't feel weak. She felt seen. And as she walked out of the pharmacy, the sunlight warm on her face, she whispered into the air as though her husband were beside her, "It's done, my love. Your truth lives on, and so will I."